Siki is an ugly, troubled teenager, just one more terrible day away from opening fire on his entire class. It's no surprise he got expelled for his bad behavior, mainly because he kept threatening to use his classmates as target practice. Even though he acted indifferent, Siki knew all too well that his future was probably just flipping burgers at McDonald's. A few minutes later, Siki's father stormed into the room and slapped him hard in the head after receiving the expulsion notice. He was so angry he was about to hit him again, but Siki anticipated his move and dodged, jumping onto the bed. His father calmed down but still wanted to hear Siki's explanation for getting kicked out. At the same time, he wondered how Siki got hold of such expensive and illegal guns in his room. He advised Siki to stop before ruining his life. That advice only made Siki furious. He yelled that he was glad they weren't blood-related because he never wanted to be like him. Those words deeply hurt his father, and Siki knew he crossed a line. But before anyone could say more, the phone rang from the liquor store his father managed downstairs. He hurried down to answer and was surprised by a huge beer order, something rare but that made him happy. He quickly drove off to deliver it. Seeing his father leave, Siki decided to practice shooting and muttered that he wished things hadn't gotten this bad. Suddenly, a loud noise came from outside the room, and a black misty rope yanked him out onto the street. Dazed and confused, Siki saw a man named Samide step out of the smoke. This man seemed to know a lot about him. At that moment, a car suddenly sped in and slammed Samide into a wall. When he stopped moving, Siki's father shouted from the car for him to get in without thinking. Siki immediately jumped into the car. After narrowly escaping, Siki kept asking why some crazy guy dragged him into the street and why his father calmly ran him over like that. His father replied that someone like Samide couldn't die just from being hit by a car. Seeing Siki still confused, he decided to reveal the truth. Siki is a descendant of demons, and Samide is a descendant of Momotaro. That's why he's always hunting Siki. Siki was stunned and speechless, but there was more, and his father didn't have time to explain everything because Samide was already catching up. Black mist began to surround the car, causing it to break down, forcing Siki's father to drive into an abandoned factory nearby. As they both got out, Siki looked back to see the car swallowed whole by the black mist. Before he could ask anything, the car exploded into a huge fireball. In the chaos, his father was distracted for just a moment, and Siki was captured by Samide. Inside the warehouse, Samide used black mist to bind Siki, suspending him in midair. When asked why he was doing this, Samide coldly replied that all those with demon blood are pests that need to be exterminated. He prepared to finish Siki off on the spot, but before he could strike, Siki's father arrived just in time. He stepped inside and explained that all the legends about Momotaro and demons are true. The war between them has lasted for thousands of years. Each generation of Momotaro's descendants carries the mission to wipe out the demons, and from this, the Momotaro organization was formed. Siki still didn't understand, but his father never expected someone as worthless as Siki to grasp it immediately. Anyway, for now, he just needed to stand still and let him handle Samide. As soon as Samide heard the challenge, he conjured two swords from the black mist and attacked with insane speed. However, Siki's father drew a mist sword to block the blow. This black mist ability is unique to Momotaro's descendants, and this was when Siki's father's true identity was revealed. He was once a member of the Momotaro organization and fought alongside Samide. His real name is Tsuyoshi, but he abandoned everything to raise Siki away from the organization's eyes, though in the end, he couldn't keep Siki hidden forever. You can't die just from getting hit by a car. Seeing Siki still confused, he decided to tell the truth. Siki is a descendant of the demon clan, and Samide is a descendant of Momotaro. That's why he has always been hunting Siki. Siki was stunned and didn't know what to say. But there was even more to the story, and his father didn't have time to explain everything, because at that moment, Samide caught up. A black mist started to surround the car, causing it to gradually break down, forcing Siki's father to drive into a nearby abandoned factory. As the two got out of the car, Siki looked back and saw the car swallowed whole by the black mist. Before he could ask anything else, the car exploded into a massive fireball. In the chaos, his father was careless for just a moment, and Siki was captured by Samide. Inside the warehouse, Samide used black fog to bind Siki, suspending him in midair. When asked why he was doing this, he coldly replied that all those with demon blood are pests that need to be exterminated. He prepared to finish Siki right there, but before he could act, Siki's father appeared just in time. He stepped in and explained that all the legends about Momotaro and the demon clan are true. The war between the two sides has lasted thousands of years. Each generation of Momotaro's descendants carries the mission to eliminate the demon clan, and that's how the Momotaro organization was formed. Siki still didn't understand, but his father never expected a failure like Siki to grasp it right away. For now, he just needed Siki to stand still and let him handle Samide. As soon as Samide heard the challenge, he created two swords from black fog and charged with insane speed. However, Siki's father also drew a mist sword to block the strike. This black mist is a special ability unique to Momotaro's descendants, and here, the true identity of Siki's father was revealed. He was once a member of the Momotaro organization, fighting alongside Samide. His real name is Tsuyoshi. However, he gave it all up to raise Siki away from the organization's eyes. But eventually, he couldn't keep Siki hidden forever. Samide asked if Tsuyoshi had forgotten how dangerous the demon clan is, but he refused to talk about that anymore. Now, he just wanted to protect his son. Tsuyoshi fought bravely, but then Samide found an opening in a blink of an eye. Tsuyoshi was deeply slashed in the chest and fell unconscious. Siki was horrified seeing his father badly injured. He screamed in anger and called out Samide's name. Samide turned to finish off Siki, but with his last bit of strength, Tsuyoshi grabbed his leg to stop him. Siki asked why he risked his life to protect a half-demon child like him, but he replied that a father doesn't need a reason to protect his son. Even though Siki wasn't a model child and carried demon blood, he had never hurt anyone. So how could Samide kill such an innocent child? How could Samide kill such an innocent child? Those words struck a chord in Samide's conscience. Lately, he'd started feeling regret for what he'd done, but he didn't want to hear it anymore and drew his sword to finish the job. Tsuyoshi. Siki helplessly watched his father about to be killed. His only thought was to kill Samide. Blood began oozing from every pore as Siki's hatred surged, overtaking his reason. When Samide turned back to find Siki, he had vanished. Suddenly, a gunshot rang right by Samide's ear, startling him and forcing him to jump back, narrowly avoiding a deadly strike within an inch. Still unaware of Siki's location, Samide saw a drop of blood fall to the ground. He looked up and saw Siki, now awakened with demon power, hanging from the ceiling. Samide couldn't believe Siki had awakened and controlled demon abilities in such a short time. But the scariest thing about demons is their lack of humanity, making them brutally ruthless. Samide prepared to defend against the next attack, but when Siki began firing blood darts at him, Samide realized he couldn't confront him head-on. He tried to escape the damage zone, but Siki didn't stop. Emerging from the smoke, Siki launched a powerful kick that sent Samide crashing into rubble, almost unconscious. Siki stood over him and unleashed all his weapons at once, causing the entire warehouse to explode. Miraculously, Samide survived, and even more surprisingly, Siki reverted back to human form. He was confused, not understanding why his body was covered in blood but reacting normally in this situation. Samide planned to take advantage of Siki's confusion and finish him off before he transformed again. He lunged forward, repeating, "Every demon must be destroyed. No exceptions." Siki couldn't control his power now, and was defenseless. Just as the blade came down, Tsuyoshi suddenly leapt out to block the attack instead of his son. Samide was stunned, unable to believe Tsuyoshi would sacrifice his life for a demon. But Tsuyoshi recalled the beautiful days with Siki and sincerely had no regrets about dying here, because he had lived a full life. Samide was exhausted by the prolonged battle. The destruction was drawing too much attention from the crowd, and the Momotaro organization needed absolute secrecy, so he decided to retreat. His body dissolved into black mist and vanished. After Samide left, Tsuyoshi collapsed in Siki's arms. Siki was panicking and said he'd call an ambulance, but Tsuyoshi said no hospital could save him now. Death was just a matter of time. He wanted to say a few last words to Siki first. He apologized for hiding the truth from him all this time because it wasn't easy to say. He also knew he didn't have much time left to support Siki but wanted his son to be strong enough to defeat both Momotaro and the other demons and live a truly free life. Siki shouted, telling his father not to speak like he was already dead because he wasn't going to let that happen. He tried carrying his father to the hospital, and seeing Siki so worried, Tsuyoshi smiled, but his wounds were too severe. After just a few steps, all his strength drained and he collapsed. Siki desperately begged his father to wake up because he hadn't had the chance to apologize and make up for all the painful words said this morning, but it was too late. Tsuyoshi took his last breath. Siki sat silently beside his father's body, tears streaming. Suddenly, someone slid up behind him and told him he couldn't stay there because 2 witnesses were coming. Siki was startled and prepared to fight, but before he could turn, he was struck in the neck and immediately lost consciousness. The person had approached silently on roller shoes. Clearly, Siki had no chance to react. Meanwhile, the leaders of the Momotaro organization panicked, knowing Samide had failed to eliminate Siki. They began. Tears suddenly streamed down his face. Someone slipped up behind him and told him he couldn't stay there because 2 witnesses were coming. Siki was startled and ready to fight, but before he could turn around, he was struck on the neck and knocked out immediately. The other person had silently approached using rollerblades without making any noise. Siki had no chance to react. Meanwhile, the leader of the Momotaro organization panicked as they learned of Samide's failure to eliminate Siki. They began to doubt whether Samid was weakening, but given the circumstances, they understood why he had to retreat. The existence of the organization must never be revealed. Still, they didn't want the public to know about the demon clan's existence. The plan was to kill Siki as soon as they had the chance. However, that had become nearly impossible because after being knocked out, Siki was taken to a remote island in the sea, where he would be enrolled in a school full of half-demon kids like himself to learn how to control his powers. But before training begins, the organization needs to evaluate whether Siki is truly useful, and clearly the upcoming experience will not be pleasant for him. In episode 2, Siki wakes up to find himself naked and tightly tied to a chair. Meanwhile, behind him is a man doing push-ups on his own car, a scene no one would expect to describe, but strangely, considering what Siki has been through, this isn't the weirdest thing. The man's name is Naito. When he sees Siki awake, he starts explaining everything. First, Naito reveals his horns, proving he's also a half-demon like Siki. Then, he says Siki was brought here for 2 reasons: evaluation and recruitment. As Siki knows, the Momotaro organization specializes in hunting people with demon blood like them. They use a strange black mist. One member of that organization is the one who killed Siki's father. Their ultimate goal is to exterminate all demons in the world. To fight back, a demon organization was also formed, and Naito's job is to find newly awakened half-demons like Siki to determine if they qualify to join. After explaining, Naito pulls out a board behind him and unties Siki's gag so he can ask questions. However, as soon as Siki opens his mouth, he screams at Naito demanding to know where his father is. Siki's outburst annoys Naito, so he deducts some points from his evaluation and calmly says that Siki's father's body is safely preserved in this facility. But, since he's dead, it doesn't really matter anymore. Siki struggles to break free, but that violent reaction is exactly why Naito had to tie him up from the start, so he won't be released anytime soon. Siki gets furious but realizes yelling won't help, so he tries to calm down and asks Naito to let him go because he still has a debt to repay to the man who killed his father. Although his tone softens, Siki's face remains fierce, so Naito still refuses. He knows well that Siki is no match for a Momotaro agent. However, if Siki is so eager to rush to his death, Naito has another way to evaluate him. He removes his tie and before Siki can react, Naito loops it around Siki's neck from behind and starts tightening it. The test is simple. If Siki can free himself, he lives. If not, he dies by Naito's hand. Either outcome doesn't matter. Siki refuses to die by the hands of this 3-handed lunatic, so he struggles until blood starts to pour around his eyes. Yet he still can't escape in time and gradually passes out. Naito doesn't intend to loosen his grip, ready to strangle Siki until he's dead. But the moment Siki blacks out, his subconscious takes over and activates the bloodthirsty demon state. The blood on the floor suddenly transforms into sharp spikes shooting upward, nearly impaling Naito, forcing him to step back. And just as he looks away from Siki for a moment, Siki transforms into a machine gun and aims straight at his head. Siki fires without hesitation, but when the smoke clears, Naito is still standing unharmed because he used his blood umbrella to block the attack. Naito realizes Siki doesn't yet know how to control his blood powers. He can only fight by going berserk. But this might be a good lesson. Naito decides to find a way to control him as gently as possible. When Siki wakes up, he sees his arm drenched in blood and Naito standing over him, looking down. He doesn't understand what just happened. Naito anticipated this because when a demon falls into a frenzy state, they lose all consciousness and destroy everything around them. That's why this room looks like a battlefield now. Siki still doesn't get it, and Naito starts thinking maybe this kid is a bit dumb. To be clear, Naito bluntly tells Siki he's just an idiot with no blood control skills. They intended to restrain him as gently as possible. When Siki woke up, he saw his arm covered in blood and Naito standing over him, looking down. He didn't understand what had just happened. Naito had anticipated this because when a demon goes into a berserk state, they lose all consciousness and destroy everything around them. That's why this room now looks like a battlefield. Siki still didn't understand, and Naito started thinking maybe this kid is really dumb. To be clear, Naito bluntly told Siki he was just a fool with no blood control skills, and that's why he was eliminated. Siki was furious at that verdict, but in his anger he also realized one clear thing. Naito is insanely strong, and right now he had no chance of defeating him. That acknowledgement deeply wounded Siki's pride, but if he wanted to take on the Momotaro organization and get revenge for his father, he needed help. So Siki swallowed his pride and bowed, begging Naito to take him as his student. However, Naito was fed up with Siki and refused immediately. He said, "In battle, if you don't use your head, you're as good as dead." Someone like Siki, losing control and going berserk without a strategy, couldn't survive. He didn't want to train someone useless and stupid like that. Now, Naito confirmed Siki was useless, so he couldn't let a madman run wild. He decided to deal with Siki. Siki tried to hold him back after hearing this, but based on what he knew about Naito, he understood he wasn't joking. He had to act to survive. Siki turned and ran when Naito started conjuring his blood spear. But he knew he wouldn't escape before the attack, so Siki decided to charge straight at him. Naito thought Siki was insane. There was no way he could win attacking head-on. He created a blood-spiked wall to block the path, and anticipated Siki's possible moves. A side attack, jumping over, or retreating. As predicted, Siki chose to jump over. What Naito didn't expect was that during the jump, Siki formed a gun from his own blood power and fired directly at Naito's head at close range. Siki was proud for hitting Naito for the first time, but the attack didn't faze him because Naito blocked it using his blood manipulation ability. Still, Naito was surprised that Siki could control his blood power, though he thought it was just luck, especially seeing Siki's face about to go berserk again. Naito didn't want to face a gun-wielding demon again, so he prepared to finish it, but surprisingly, Siki controlled his frenzy and stayed composed. Maybe it wasn't luck. Naito asked how he managed to control himself. Siki said he saw Naito use a ring to cut his finger to summon the blood spear, so he tried to imitate and shouted inside his head to summon a gun. Eventually, his hand turned into a real gun. Naito couldn't believe such a stupid logic worked, but it did. Usually, to avoid going berserk, half-demons must keep their emotions stable. Hot-tempered ones like Siki often lose control, but he was different. He didn't suppress his emotions, but seemed to defeat his own anger and turn it into power, a crude method that unleashed explosive force. Siki told Naito he just wanted to be strong enough to kill the one who killed his father. He swore that if Naito agreed to train him, he would learn seriously. Siki was very sincere, and Naito could feel that, but he still refused. What Siki did was a gamble with his life, and he had no backup plan if he failed. Naito still thought Siki was incompetent. However, that didn't mean Siki was hopeless. Naito changed his mind and decided to take Siki as his student, so the execution order was cancelled. Naito didn't explain why he changed his mind, but the important thing was he saw potential in Siki and didn't want to waste it. The island they were on was called Onigashima, and at its center was Risu Academy, a military school training half-demons to fight the Momotaro organization. Naito was the homeroom teacher at this academy. From now on, he would be in charge of Siki and the other students. Siki would have to live, train, and fight every day until he could face the Momotaro agents, so he'd better prepare himself mentally. However, Siki's brain was almost overloaded with all the information being dumped on him. Though he didn't understand much yet, he didn't care anymore. As long as he could get stronger to avenge his father, he was willing to do anything. Soon after, Naito took Siki to the locker room to put on the academy uniform. It felt strange, because Siki thought he'd never wear a uniform again after being kicked out of his old school. Naito said there were a few other students in the current class, but among them, Siki was the weakest, so it was best and the other students. Siki will have to live, train, and fight every day until the moment he can face the Momotaro agents, so it's best if he prepares himself mentally. However, Siki's brain was almost overloaded with all the information being thrown at him. Even though there were still many things he didn't understand, Siki didn't care anymore. As long as he could get stronger to avenge his father, he was willing to do anything. Not long after, Naito took Siki to the changing room so he could put on the academy uniform. It felt really strange because Siki had thought he'd never wear a uniform again after being expelled from his old school. Naito told him that the current class had a few other students, but among them, Siki was the weakest, so it was best not to pick fights with anyone. By the way, Siki asked about his father, and Naito answered that his father's body was currently kept in the morgue, and the funeral arrangements were up to Siki. This answer immediately made him feel down, but Naito said there was no use in drowning in regrets. Instead, Siki should focus on becoming stronger so he would never have to taste such regret again. He must never experience such regret again. After saying that, Naito didn't want to waste time standing around, so he slid away, wearing Paton's shoes while telling Siki he only had 15 seconds to get to class if he didn't want to be late. Siki yelled that it wasn't fair but still had to run as fast as he could. When he reached the classroom door, Siki was still thinking about how to introduce himself coolly, but Naito hated wasting time, so he kicked Siki straight into the classroom, causing him to fall flat on his face with a bloody nose. Realizing he was bleeding, Siki turned to ask the nearest person for a tissue, but a masked student barked, "Shut up and sit still." That attitude made Siki furious, so he immediately pressed his face against the eyes behind that mask. The class had other students whose names he didn't know yet, but our male lead was so tech-savvy and bold that he shut all of them down from their first encounter, and Siki was especially pissed off at the guy wearing the mask, because he dared to look down on him. Just when the tension reached its peak, the two suddenly found themselves forced to sit next to each other, and Naito stood right behind them, but neither of them noticed when he moved. Terrified, they froze, completely silent. Still, Siki grumbled that he didn't want to sit next to the masked guy, but Naito didn't care about the students' personal issues, so he started announcing that the first lesson today would be a game of tag. Siki suspected the tag at this school might be some kind of code, but he was wrong, it was just a regular game of tag. However, the rules were special. Students had to cross the forest and reach the destination point. Naito would be the chaser, and anyone caught would be expelled immediately. Naito wouldn't use his blood power, but students could use as much blood as they wanted. However, if anyone lost control and fell into a frenzy state, Naito would use his blood magic, and the consequences would be brutal. A student asked what would happen if they managed to kill Naito. Naito replied that whoever could do that would graduate immediately and get to choose their combat unit as they wished. Of course, Naito wouldn't let that happen. After easily announcing the rewards, the whole class got excited, except Siki was still hesitant because he wasn't used to all these weird things, but a little worry wouldn't stop him. Siki looked straight at Naito and declared, "Bring it on, Episode 3. Everything was set, and the demon hunt was about to begin, a bizarre hide-and-seek game where students had to avoid being caught for an hour and return to school before the game started. Naito gave one last rule, holding 2 orbs and declaring that to win, students needed to bring back 1 orb. Then without warning, he threw both deep into the forest. He made it clear that returning without an orb was useless. The students were confused, not understanding what kind of weird test this was with only 2 orbs for the whole group, so they quickly realized the real goal was to snatch the orbs from others. Naito announced the students would be split into 3 teams. The first team was Homer, Jin, and Siki. The second team was Akari and Suji. The last team comprised Rakuro and Queen. According to the teacher, only teams 2 and 3 started with orbs, which confirmed Queen's suspicion that the goal was to steal from classmates. Meanwhile, just hearing this made Siki's head hurt because he thought 3 people would be expelled right at the start. Naito opened the door leading into the forest and announced the teacher would join after students had entered for 15 minutes. Siki couldn't hide his feelings, refusing to work with that dumb mouth-threatening guy. So the teacher immediately threatened to expel him if he didn't stop complaining today. Stepping closer to Siki, bowing slightly, and promising to do his best not to be a burden to the group. As for Siki, being a troublemaker with 0 experience talking to girls, in fact, it had been years since any girl had ever talked to him first, he reacted clumsily, almost pitifully. And threatened that dumb mouth. Then the teacher immediately threatened to expel him if he didn't stop complaining today. Stepping closer to Siki, she slightly bowed her head and promised to do her best not to be a burden to the group. As for Siki, originally a troublemaker with no experience talking to girls, and who hadn't had a girl start a conversation with him in years, he reacted clumsily and pitifully. He swore to protect her with all his heart because he feared becoming a burden. Today, he tried hard to reassure her that he would do everything so as not to hold the group back. Then she went over to Jin and said she was counting on him, but he completely ignored her coldness, making her burst into tears, apologizing between sobs for starting a conversation. Siki scolded Jin and tried to comfort Homer, saying that crying would ruin her cute face, but then awkwardly corrected himself that even crying she was cute, just that smiling was even cuter. Homer begged him not to call her cute anymore, which only made Siki find her even more adorable. No matter what, he told Homer that the 2 of them would win by their own strength and didn't forget to say bluntly. Meanwhile, Jin just sighed and told Siki to stop bothering others and not drag him into his mess, because Siki would sooner or later get expelled, so it's best to disappear before becoming a laughingstock. Siki replied that he had a very clear goal and wouldn't run away. Jin just shrugged, thinking it was definitely a stupid goal, making Siki even more furious. Without another word, the teacher ordered the first group to enter the forest. The 2 boys charged in first, while Homer stood frozen with fear, only daring to step in with worry inside. Jin recalled Naito's instruction to attack with the intent to kill the opponent, because if successful, he would graduate immediately and could join any unit he wanted. For Jin, this was the chance to join the team he needed, to hunt down someone he deeply hated. Suddenly, Siki appeared behind Jin, planning to ambush him with a branch, but Jin dodged. Siki said he wasn't the type to cause pointless trouble, but this time he was willing to take a risk because the idiot just called Siki's dream ridiculous and now had to pay for it. Unfazed, Jin tore off his mask, revealing a mouth full of terrifying scars, then slashed his own arm, turning the flowing blood into spinning saw blades, unleashing a terrifying power. He seemed to be the saw demon. Siki was truly amazed and asked how he could do that. Jin smirked mockingly, telling Siki that if he was scared, he should just run away. But Siki snapped back that if he cowardly retreated now, his father's death would be meaningless. Seeing his teammate ready for revenge, Jin contemptuously said, that's why the 2 of them would never see eye to eye. Tired of arguing, Siki bit his finger hard, trying to use his own blood to become a gun demon, but no matter how hard he focused, nothing happened. He suddenly realized this wasn't as easy as just wanting it. Meanwhile, Jin used his blood powers skillfully, which made Siki even more furious. Jin declared that Siki was just a warm-up before he killed the teacher. With no choice left, Siki charged into battle, armed only with a stick. In that situation, he still showed reckless courage, attacking head-on. Jin responded without holding back. When they clashed, not only was Siki's stick split in half, but many trees around them were also chopped down by the overwhelming power. Meanwhile, the third member of the group got lost in the forest, nervously calling her teammates in a low voice as she walked. Hearing the terrifying sounds of battle from the others, she got distracted and tripped over a root. At that moment, she was certain she should never have set foot in this damn school. For a moment, she recalled Siki's promise to help her, but quickly sank into self-doubt, thinking she was useless, always having to rely on others. Nearby, a guy holding an umbrella found one of the two spheres from the game outside the forest. Other groups only heard loud crashing noises, not understanding what the hell was going on. This made Rokuro even more worried, while Akari, on the contrary, grew more eager to enter the forest immediately. Turning back to the fight, Siki did everything to fight back barehanded, but every punch he threw missed. Meanwhile, Jin landed a punch straight to Siki's nose, making him feel sharp, frustrating pain. Defeated, Siki muttered, wondering how Jin could so easily use blood power and why. Jin's blood took a completely different form compared to the teacher's. He didn't understand anything and realized he knew nothing about this world. That confusion made him careless. Immediately, he took a heavy blow to the face, boiling with rage. This was the first time Siki was this angry, just because he couldn't understand something. When the tide clearly turned in his favor, Jin mocked his opponent for unable to use blood and took a powerful blow to the face and was boiling with rage. This was the first time Siki had been this pissed just because he didn't understand something. When the battle clearly tipped in his favor, Jin mocked his opponent for being unable to use blood and then turned to walk away. But Siki refused to give up, struggling to stand, and called him back. Losing patience, Jin threw a giant spinning blade towards Siki. Just then, Homer appeared after wandering, looking for teammates. Unfortunately, she showed up right as the blade came flying and almost got killed on the spot. Actually, that definitely would have happened if Siki hadn't quickly pulled her out of the spinning saw's path. In that split second, he got a deep slash wound, hadn't pulled her away from the spinning saw in time. In that split second, he got a deep slash on his hand. Furious, Siki forced Jin to apologize. Jin just shrugged and said, "Whatever, stop playing the hero." The weakling meant if Siki was scared of such a simple attack, he'd better give up because things would only get worse from now on. That rude attitude made Siki even angrier, until he saw Homer bowing her head repeatedly, apologizing for causing his injury. Siki insisted it was the fault of that mouthy guy, but Homer was tormented by guilt, so much that she started bleeding from her nose, not just a little, but a terrifying flood. In desperation, she blurted out that she would pay with her own life. Before anyone could react, that massive blood flow transformed into a huge, terrifying creature that even Jin's eyes widened in shock. Jin knew people like them had more blood than normal humans, but this scene was beyond imagination. Homer shouted for her teammates to run immediately if they didn't want to be killed. While she spoke, the monster stood up, ready to unleash a devastating attack. Meanwhile, Teacher Naito was standing elsewhere in the forest, bored because nothing was happening. The principal suddenly appeared and asked if he really intended to just teach the basics today, but actually assigning difficult tasks from day one was typical Naito style. He replied that practice was more effective than wasting a whole day on theory. The principal nodded, acknowledging Naito truly cared about the students. Every year, many half-demon kids died, most targeted because of their demon ancestry. Some were captured alive for experiments. The principal wondered what the kids thought in their final moments, killed without understanding why. Eventually, he wished for a real equal paradise for everyone. Naito responded they didn't need paradise. If the kids were strong enough, they wouldn't die. It was that simple. The principal nodded and told him to train those kids to become stronger at all costs because of having demon ancestors. Some were captured alive to be used as test subjects. The principal wondered what those children thought in their last moments when they were killed without understanding why. Finally, he wished this world had a true equal paradise for everyone. Naito replied they didn't need paradise. If the kids were strong enough, they wouldn't die. It was as simple as that. The principal nodded and told him he must train those kids to be strong at all costs. Then he disappeared. Right then, Naito heard another explosion from the forest, the aftermath of the group's battle, returning to the center of the skirmish. Siki barely escaped death from an attack by a giant blood monster. Jin tried to attack the monster, but every strike was useless. Siki shouted at his teammates to stop the monster to check something, but today she was losing blood all over her body like a leaky water bag and couldn't do anything. After losing too much blood, she fainted. Siki rushed to pull her out of danger. When he got close, he realized the monster was protecting her, which made Jin hypothesize whether blood might have its own will. Suddenly, the monster spewed a torrent of blood like a flood. Jin managed to hide behind a rock to avoid it, but Siki was swept away. Today, waking up weak, begging his sister to stop. Siki heard her call the monster sister, which completely confused him. Today, Van High, they should run, but Siki refused. He couldn't, proposed a hypothesis whether blood could have its own will. Suddenly, the monster spewed out a raging torrent of blood like a flood. Jin managed to hide behind a rock to avoid it, while Siki was swept away. Today, waking up weak, he begged his older sister to stop. Siki was completely confused when he heard her call the monster sister. Today, Van High wanted to run away, but Siki refused. He couldn't let his friend die right before his eyes. That was unbearable. Clearly, Homer was in great pain. Then she fainted again, and the monster roared a thunderous bellow like a storm, shaking the entire forest so much that even those far away could feel it. From a tall tree, Naito observed everything and immediately recognized this as Homer's human blood skill. He silently wondered how the students would handle this chaotic situation. As for Siki, he tried to gather blood from the ground to use, but failed again. Naito noted that what he managed to do was just a rare stroke of luck, once in 100 chances. As the battle grew chaotic, Siki began to feel like a complete loser. He had never won a fight. His father was killed, and now he was powerless to do anything. The helplessness and the thought of dying miserably sparked fierce anger and disappointment inside him. Jin teased that if he wanted to cry, he should go home and cry under a blanket. This place wasn't for the weak. Then he stepped forward, tearing his own arms to create blood-saw blades of different shapes to keep fighting, even though he hadn't fully recovered. Jin also knew that running away now would only lead to death. Naito observed and noted that creating multiple weapon shapes at once was an advanced skill, proving Jin was a capable and experienced student. Basically, blood can change shape and intensity at will. Anything the user imagines will be transmitted from the brain through nerves. Essentially, blood can change shape and intensity at will. Whatever the user imagines is transmitted from the brain through nerves and blood vessels to become a physical entity. Because this process is controlled by the mind, it can cause psychological trauma in some people, or it can reflect tastes, preferences, or even life experiences. Blood almost reveals a part of the user's soul. Over time, this technique is called blood moon release. With this tactic, Jin charges straight at the monster, dodging its first swing and slicing through the blood-red skin with a spinning blood blade. Using the momentum, he aims directly for the monster's neck, but it instinctively raises its arm to block the strike. A critical hit. Meanwhile, Siki is still desperately trying to summon blood power but gets nothing at all. Thinking it over, he realizes Jin has only created sharp blood blades all along, and the monster is actually Homa's sister. Recalling his weapon-filled room, Siki finally understands what Jin has done. Once the blood is successfully used, the monster lets out a terrifying roar that makes Jin's ears feel like they're about to explode. That's when Naito decides his students have reached their limit and prepares to intervene. But before he can act, Siki appears holding an automatic gun. After successfully releasing his blood power, the teacher decides to temporarily withdraw, wanting to observe what happens next. The monster immediately attacks Siki, trying to smash him with a powerful slap, but Siki quickly dodges and shoots it straight in the chest. The shot causes the monster's body to nearly explode in an unimaginable way, leaving both Jin and Naito stunned at the sight. Episode 4. Jin and Naito are stunned by Siki's power. The blood monster dissolves, body parts flying everywhere, and Homa faints. Meanwhile, Jin is still recovering from Siki's overwhelming force when suddenly it starts raining blood. However, it's just blood splattered in the air from Siki's previous attack, soon turning back into normal rain. Jin realizes Siki's strike not only destroyed the female titan but also changed the weather. Meanwhile, Siki isn't thinking about that. He's focused on Homa to see if she's okay, but his vision blurs and he collapses, unable to move. Naito rushes over, explaining that Siki released too much blood power and has no strength left. Come on. Siki insists he can still keep going. He tries to stand but collapses again in less than 5 seconds. Naito mocks him as a chicken who can't control his power but admits Siki's strength is beyond anything he's ever seen. Naito warns that if Siki keeps using too much blood, he could die. But Siki isn't worried about himself. He asked Naito earlier to check on Homa first, saying he could be dealt with later. Naito is surprised Siki still cares about others while he's in critical condition. Just as Naito prepares to help, Jin suddenly attacks. Luckily, Naito's reflexes are fast enough to block and push Jin back. Jin casually declares there's no need to worry about the loser. Naito angrily asks what happens if he dies today without medical help, but Jin replies that's none of his business. That answer disgusts Naito. He bluntly says he hates selfish bastards like Jin, but Jin doesn't care. He just asks to confirm that killing Naito means graduation. Naito confirms this is true, so Jin immediately charges in to attack. Naito blocks Jin's blood-saw blade with a special umbrella made from the same material as Hulk's pants indestructible. He presses a button to release a smoke screen. Jin thinks Naito is setting up an ambush and cautiously waits for the teacher to appear so he can strike. But Jin is immediately hit by rubber bullets. He quickly hides behind a tree while Naito continuously fires using his versatile umbrella. He says these bullets won't kill Jin, but the pain is unbearable. He quickly hid behind a tree, while Naito kept shooting with his multi-purpose umbrella. He said these bullets wouldn't kill Jin but would definitely hurt. Naito even deliberately aimed at Jin's injured hand to cause maximum damage. Jin realized Naito was trying to keep distance, thinking he could only fight up close. But Jin had some secret moves for situations like this. He immediately dashed out from cover, dodged the bullets, then launched a barrage of flying blades at Naito. Although Naito easily dodged, he was quite surprised Jin had a way to counter long-range attacks. Jin continued his relentless assault and suddenly appeared right behind Naito in mid-air. He thought his teacher wouldn't react in time, but Naito simply threw a bomb at Jin, causing him to panic. Luckily, it was just a smoke bomb. Jin assumed Naito would keep shooting from afar, so he didn't expect Naito to close in from behind and deliver a punch so strong it seemed like it would crush his spine. Naito warned that relying too much on predictions in battle makes one vulnerable to ambush. Jin was now exhausted and badly injured, unable to move, but he still struggled to get up. Naito was forced to flip his umbrella and use it like a cage to trap Jin. Even trapped, Jin tried to break the cage and escape, prompting Naito to ask if he was so desperate that he wanted to see his father. Jin immediately fell silent, hearing his father's name, then asked how Naito knew about that. Naito replied, "I checked Jin's file, so I know a few things, including that his father is a Momotaro." Jin's whole body seemed ready to explode upon hearing that. Siki was stunned to discover they seemed to share a similar past, but Jin was consumed by hatred. He confessed his father was a Momotaro and that bastard had taken everything from him. He had killed Jin's entire family, and then used Jin as a test subject, leaving scars all over his body. Jin recalled the time he had to live off trash with an unending grudge against his father, swearing to kill him with his own hands, even if it cost his life. In his rage, Jin unleashed a power strong enough to shatter the cage holding him. However, before he could do anything, Naito grabbed his face and slammed it hard into the ground. He scolded Jin, "You're such a stupid kid. Dying while chasing your dreams just means you were a fool who never had a chance." He told Jin to live to fulfill his goals, even if it meant face failure or humiliation. Hearing that, Jin finally stopped struggling. Naito immediately called the school, reporting an injured student needing a nurse, and Homer was disqualified from the test due to blood loss, while Jin was tied up. Meanwhile, Siki was still standing. Naito told him there were less than 6 minutes left. Naito held one of the two balls and said Siki had two choices: either take the ball from him or find the other ball within 5 minutes and bring it back to the school. Siki complained that it wasn't fair but finally had to play by Naito's rules. He immediately turned and ran, with Naito following to watch what he would do. At the same time, Jin sat tied to a tree trunk when Siki suddenly appeared from the bushes. He approached and said he would free Jin but only if Jin cooperated. Jin was shocked by the offer, and Siki explained that alone, no one could beat Naito, but together, they had a chance. Jin refused, saying being saved by an idiot would make him lose all pride. Siki didn't argue about being stupid but instead asked whether pride was more important than Jin's goal since he'd never achieve it just sitting there. Jin asked why Siki cared, and Siki revealed his father was also a Momotaro. Jin was stunned, while Siki pulled out a classic Naruto card to say they were alike. Meanwhile, Naito was searching for Siki but couldn't find him, suspecting he had returned. Just then, he saw Siki running and decided to chase him, to corner him. Siki ran while silently cursing Jin, not because Jin hadn't helped him but because even when saved, Jin still wanted to be the one in control. Suddenly, Jin jumped down from above to attack Naito, aiming for the ball, but Naito easily dodged. However, it was just a feint. The real move was the rope tied to a rock that Jin threw, wrapping tightly around Naito. Siki grabbed the other end of the rope and together they pulled with all their strength, but Naito planted his feet firmly, confident their stamina was enough to beat him. Suddenly, Jin shot a bloodied blade toward Naito, forcing him to dodge and lose balance, pressuring him. Siki ran while cursing Jin silently, not because Jin wasn't helping, but because even after being saved, Jin still wanted to be the one calling the shots. Suddenly, Jin jumped down from above to attack Naito, aiming for the ball, but Naito easily dodged. However, that was just a feint. The real attack was a rope tied to a rock that Jin threw, wrapping tightly around Naito. Siki grabbed the other end of the rope, and together they pulled with all their strength, but Naito planted his feet firmly, confident their strength wasn't enough to beat him. Suddenly, Jin shot a blood blade at Naito, forcing him to dodge and lose balance. That was the chance for Siki to rush in and knock the ball out of Naito's hand. The ball rolled toward Jin, and Naito knew if he brought the ball back to the school, Siki would definitely try to take it back. He planned to use the moment they fought over it to snatch the ball again, but unexpectedly, Siki told Jin to hold the ball and run. Jin obeyed, while Siki excitedly cheered him on. He declared to Naito that they had stolen the ball from him, but Naito reminded him only the one who brings the ball back to school wins, and if that's the case, only Jin counts. Siki got annoyed when he realized this, while Naito thought to himself that he's such an idiot, never thinking things through before acting. Indeed, Siki deeply regretted his decision and started yelling for Jin to come back, but Jin had run too far to hear anything. He was sure that if he kept this pace, he'd make it back to school within the time limit. However, while running, he suddenly remembered that without Siki's help, he wouldn't have this chance. That thought made him unable to leave Siki behind, so Jin turned back and ran toward Siki, who at that moment was stunned and jokingly asked if Jin was lost, seriously planning to ask directions back to school? Jin immediately told Siki to shut up, saying the only reason he turned back was because he didn't want to succeed thanks to some idiot. He'd rather fail but reach his goal on his own. So, Jin asked Siki to take the ball and bring it back to the academy. However, just as they were about to touch hands, a small pink creature suddenly rushed between them at high speed. Naito immediately paused the test and said they shouldn't fight with Muku, the super-fast delivery pet, present here. He knew Muku was only deployed in emergencies. Naito then activated the radio on Muku's back and received a distress call from the Kyoto branch, which was under attack by the Momotaro agency outside the test area. Meanwhile, the other students patiently waited their turn, thinking Siki and his group failed because they exceeded the time limit, but then Naito returned with Siki and Jin, announcing that the Kyoto branch was in serious danger and requesting support, so they would temporarily suspend the test and move there immediately. The group quickly boarded a boat and headed to the Kyoto branch. The students had mixed feelings about having to enter a real battlefield so early, but Naito reassured them they wouldn't have to fight directly, only support those who would go to battle. Soon, they arrived in Kyoto. Naito led them to an area near a famous temple. Since the half-demon agency's base was right underneath it, he took the trainees to a seemingly ordinary restaurant, where a creepy old lady greeted them. Upon entering the living room, the old lady revealed a secret staircase leading underground, taking them to their destination. Meanwhile, at another location, a captain of the Momotaro agency named Tsubakiri had just finished hunting a group of half-demons. He called them fake soldier maggots. Vice Captain Domogi told him he went overboard again, complaining about the mess he caused that would be a pain to clean. Tsubakiri replied he was just extremely annoyed by those maggots and even wished to face a female half-demon because they were tougher and could endure more pain than male half-demons, making them perfect for his experiments. Domogi said his experiments were disgusting, and she especially hated what was approaching them. Tsubakiri told her not to be cold to his favorite creation, a creature mixed between a dog, monkey, and bird. Only he named it Aguri, meaning ugly, and that was the only thing Domogi agreed with him on. Tsubakiri said Aguri was both an important research specimen and a loyal member of the biological weapon unit against half-demons. Domogi reminded him their job was to eliminate dangerous half-demons and save civilians, so he should contribute more, instead of wasting time on those creepy experiments. Tsubakiri responded that half-demon blood was extremely interesting and he was trying to help in his own way. He insisted that if they learned how to control half-demon blood, it would greatly benefit the Momotaro agency. Meanwhile, elsewhere, a captain of the Momotaro unit named Tsubakiri had just finished hunting a half-demon squad. He called them fake soldier maggots. Vice Captain Domogi told him he had gone overboard again, complaining that the mess he made would be a pain to clean up. Tsubakiri replied he just felt extremely annoyed seeing those maggots, and even wished to face a female half-demon, because they were tougher and could endure pain more than male half-demons, making them perfect for his experiments. Domogi said his experiments were disgusting and she especially hated the thing approaching them. Tsubakiri told her not to be cold toward his favorite creation, a hybrid creature between a dog, monkey, and bird. Only he named it Aguri, which means ugly, and that was the only thing Domogi agreed with him on. Tsubakiri said Aguri was both an important research specimen and a loyal member of the anti-half-demon bioweapons squad. Domogi reminded him their job was to eliminate dangerous half-demons and save civilians, so he should contribute more instead of wasting time on gruesome research. Tsubakiri replied half-demon blood was fascinating and he was trying to help in his own way. He was certain that if they learned to control half-demon blood, it would greatly benefit the Momotaro unit. If they could even turn the half-demon's healing ability into medicine, they could make a lot. If they could turn the half-demon's blood healing ability into medicine, they could make loads of money and become rich. Demogi reminded him even Momotaro had similar powers, but Tsubakiri thought experimenting on humans was unwise. To him, half-demons were just maggots that needed testing because killing them outright was a waste. Nearby, a half-demon child was terrified after hearing everything. The boy was hiding behind a corner, trying to stay as quiet as possible, but as soon as he heard the footsteps of two Momotaro agents moving away, he breathed a sigh of relief, and that was his fatal mistake. Tsubakiri heard and immediately moved toward him. The boy panicked, and Tsubakiri decided to take him back to the lab. Zamogi said she would knock him out to avoid trouble, but when she tried to put him to sleep without drugs, a drop of blood splattered on Tsubakiri's coat. Zamogi understood this was bad news, not for her, but for the half-demon boy. Tsubakiri stepped forward and grabbed. He kicked the boy repeatedly, even though he was captivated by the half-demon blood. It was still filthy, and he refused to have it on his uniform. He asked the boy if his parents were nearby and if they belonged to the group he had just killed. Receiving no answer, he dragged the nearby half-demon corpses up for the boy to see, asking if his parents were there. The boy was too scared to speak, and Tsubakiri decided to pin him down with the corpses. Zomogi felt anger because of all Momotaro's abilities she had seen. Tsubakiri's was the cruelest. The black mist escaping from the half-demon bodies was actually a special bacteria living in their blood, which could be weaponized. Tsubakiri could control the corpses with that bacteria, and Zamagi still couldn't get used to it. Soon, Tsubakiri ended the boy's suffering by crushing him. Then he told the experimental monster Aguri to eat the giant half-demon dango, while he and Zamogi continued hunting down other maggot-like creatures to slaughter. Meanwhile, Siki and the other trainees were walking through a large tunnel. Naito said some shops in the area had entrances leading down to this tunnel, which connected directly to their base. They quickly reached the gate leading into the space just below a Ruta temple, designed like a traditional Japanese house. The trainees couldn't believe their eyes when Naito said this was the Kyoto branch headquarters of the Half-Demon Bureau. Just then, a doctor stepped out of the next room complaining about his workload, but his attitude changed completely when he saw Naito. He greeted him cheerfully and began fixing his hair when he noticed a sexy blonde girl walking with him. But she immediately rejected his flirtation, and it didn't break his heart because he was used to being turned down. Siki asked Naito who that clown was, and Naito introduced him as Kyosa, the support unit commander at the Kyoto base. Kyosa added that he and Naito had been classmates at the academy, but Naito didn't want to chat and decided to head straight to the front lines. Shiki asked to join, and the other trainees also wanted to follow, rather than stay with a weirdo like Kyosa, but Naito ignored them all. He told Kyosa to do whatever he wanted with these kids, and left. At that moment, a nurse called Kyosa back to work. She also noticed the trainee group and immediately ordered them to change clothes because they were urgently needed for support. They quickly put on assistant nurse uniforms and headed to the field hospital, where dozens of wounded half-demons groaned in pain. One half-demon had just been brought in missing both legs and with many life-threatening injuries. Siki was horrified to see his condition, and the nurse said if things continued like this, he would only live for at most 3 more minutes. Kyoya just smiled and said they wouldn't let him die. Siki snapped, demanding they not make empty promises. Kyosa praised his honesty and kindness but said he was an important figure here and decided to show the kids what real support looked like. Elsewhere, Tsubakiri and Zamogi had just taken down the captain and vice-captain of another group. The remaining half-demons were all terrified, but Tsubakiri was disappointed to be dealing with nobodies when he wanted to face someone strong. Just then, Naito appeared and immediately activated his ability. Tsubakiri was happy to see him, but Naito didn't let him enjoy that joy for long. He launched a devastating attack with blood arrows. The half-demons cheered seeing Naito come to the rescue, but Tsubakiri was unharmed because he used the captain's and vice-captain's corpses as a flesh shield. It turned out he knew Naito already, so they talked like old friends. He asked Naito what he was doing in Kyoto since this wasn't his territory. Tsubakiri, he lost both legs and suffered multiple life-threatening wounds. Siki was horrified to see his condition, and the nurse said if things stayed like this, he'd only survive 3 more minutes at best. Kyoya just smiled and said they wouldn't let him die. Siki snapped back, demanding they stop making empty promises. Kyosa praised him for being straightforward and kind but said he was the key figure here and decided to show the kids what real support looks like. Elsewhere, Tsubakiri and Zamogi just took down the captain and vice-captain of another group. The remaining half-demons were all terrified, but Tsubakiri looked disappointed to be dealing with nobodies when he wanted to face someone strong. Just then, Naito appeared and immediately activated his power. Tsubakiri was glad to see him, but Naito didn't let him enjoy that joy for long. He launched a lethal attack with blood arrows. The half-demons cheered when Naito came to save them, but Tsubakiri was unharmed, using the bodies of the captain and vice-captain as a flesh shield. It turned out he knew Naito beforehand, so they spoke like old friends. He asked why Naito was in Kyoto since it wasn't his territory. Tsubakiri had heard rumors of a half-demon gathering in Kyoto. If they wiped that out, the problem would be solved. Naito kept a calm expression and said he didn't know anything about that. Tsubakiri replied that if even Naito denied its existence, he would let it go, then mentioned he'd tour the big temple. Naito whispered in panic. Knowing Tsubakiri's instincts were sharp, he decided to stop him right there, preparing for a serious fight. Back at headquarters, Kyoya inserted multiple blood infusion tubes into his body. Siki wondered if that blood should be saved for the injured, but the nurse told him blood tubes into his body. Siki wondered if that blood should be saved for the injured, but the nurse told him to be quiet and just watch Kyosa approach the most seriously injured person, asking if he wanted to regrow an arm or a leg since he couldn't do both right now. The man gathered all his strength and said he wanted his arm back to hold his child. Kyosa promised. He said he would help, but warned the process would be excruciatingly painful. He sliced his wrist to let his blood flow into the man's mouth. He explained his blood could multiply a half-demon's healing ability many times over as soon as it took effect. The man screamed in pain, and the nurse immediately told the trainees to hold him down. Siki and the others complied. Meanwhile, the nurse told the others to fetch more blood from the next room. Soon, something began to emerge from the man's bandaged arm, and Siki shuddered seeing a vague shape like human fingers. The other trainees returned surprised as the injured man regenerated both arms, even serious burn wounds on his chest fully healed. Siki immediately ran up to ask Kiora if they could regrow his legs as well. Kiora confirmed they could, but it must be done slowly with small doses of blood because the man had already taken too much. More could cause his body to produce antibodies against Kiora's blood. Kiora approached the patient, saying from now on he would be discharged from combat duty but could join the support unit to help others with a pair of prosthetic legs. Soon, he'd be playing with his children again. The man was moved to tears hearing this. Kiora turned to the trainees, telling them someday they might face the same situation. He understood that glory was only earned on the front lines, but reminded them the brave fighters there owed their lives to those protecting them from behind the support unit. Siki and a few others were very impressed with Kiora and were ready to help him with anything. Kiora told Siki he needed help with something else and led him to meet a sad girl named Mei, brought in yesterday after the Momotaro unit attack. Her parents were still missing, and Kiora wanted to ask for Siki's kindness to help the girl feel better. Siki agreed and started talking with Mei. Gradually, she opened up. He asked about school, and Mei said she had never attended. Siki was still wondering if she was as much trouble as he was when the support unit brought back some bodies from the battlefield, including Mei's parents. She burst into tears seeing them. Meanwhile, Kiora said he still couldn't get used to such heartbreaking scenes, despite having witnessed many. But behind these bodies lay a more sinister plot as Tsubaki told Naito he had infected some half-demon corpses with his bacteria, knowing the support unit would bring them back to base for funerals, allowing him to remotely control the bodies to destroy the base. Naito was shocked to hear this, and Tsubaki decided to test if the plan had succeeded. He awakened the corpse of Mei's father. While Siki and Kiora were off guard, Mei was overjoyed thinking her father was still alive, but he immediately choked her under Tsubaki's command. Siki and Kiora quickly realized, and Kiora understood this was Tsubaki's ability. He told Siki to cover Mei's eyes. Siki obeyed, and Kiora stabbed the man's brain with 2 sharp knives, rendering him still because the only way to disable these puppets was to destroy their brain. Even beheading wouldn't work. When Siki removed his hands, Mei cried again, seeing her father's condition. Kiora realized there might be many more such corpses here, and indeed, the bodies brought to the base started to twitch their fingers. Episode 6. Just as Kiora feared, the remaining corpses being transported in the underground base began to move one by one. Mei was severely shocked when she saw blood trickling from her father's head. While everyone was still trying to understand what was happening, the corpse of her father was still alive, but he immediately choked her under Tsubaki's orders. Siki and Kiora quickly realized it was Tsubaki's power, and Kiora told Siki to cover Mei's eyes. Siki obeyed, and Kiora stabbed the man's brain with 2 sharp knives, pierced through the man's brain, rendering him motionless because the only way to disable this mess was to destroy the brain. Even decapitation wouldn't work. When Siki withdrew his hand, Mei burst into tears upon seeing her father's condition. Kiora realized there might be many more corpses like this here, and indeed, the bodies brought to the base started moving their fingers. Episode 6. Just as Kiora feared, the remaining corpses being transported in the underground base began to move one by one. Mei was shocked when she saw blood flowing from her father's head. While everyone was still trying to understand what was happening, the corpse of moved without warning. Before they could react, she wrapped her arms around Siki's neck from behind with immense force. Horrified, Mei panicked seeing this and tried to stop her mother, but Siki told her to stay back. In this situation, Kiora knew he had no choice but to act again, but just then, he was attacked by more corpses. The girl kept trying to rouse her mother. Meanwhile, Siki's vision blurred, and the remaining corpses in the base began moving. They attacked the staff without hesitation and broke through the walls to reach the patients. Attack. The girl kept trying to wake her mother. Meanwhile, Siki's vision gradually blurred and the remaining corpses in the base also began to move. They attacked the staff without hesitation and broke through the walls to reach the helpless patients. Nurses tried to resist, but the number of corpses kept increasing. Kiora was certain that Tsubaki himself was controlling all these zombies. Mei desperately called out to her mother, hoping she would recognize her, but it was obviously hopeless. Siki immediately pulled Mei as far away as possible. Meanwhile, Kiora was surrounded by too many enemies to help. Siki knew it was time to use the weapon he had been hiding. In a flashback, Naito gave him that gun, and told him to use it only when truly necessary because he still couldn't fully control his blood. Siki was excited to hold a real gun because, until now he had only played with toy guns, and a real gun was on a whole different level. Everyone plays with what they like. Naito said this gun used bullets mixed with demon blood, making it far more powerful than normal bullets. Back to the present, Siki held the gun in one hand, the other arm hugging Mei, whispering to her not to watch what was about to happen. Without hesitation, Siki shot straight in Mei's mother's head from behind. She collapsed instantly. That scene made Siki gasp for breath, but he quickly turned around, using the gun to take down the zombies attacking Kiora while shielding Mei so she wouldn't see the horrific sight. Then he helped Kiora up and was thanked by him, who complained that the logistics unit was useless in combat. He said patients needed to be moved to safety and asked Siki to handle the main hall. Siki agreed without hesitation. Meanwhile, the rest of the class struggled to fight the enemies. Ikari punched hard, clearly furious from the surprise attack with no one understanding what was happening. Queen also fought back with brute strength. But no matter how many zombies they knocked down, they stood back up just seconds later. Jin realized this and was confused about how to finish them off. Just then, Siki and Kiora appeared to explain. He said the only way to kill the zombies was to shoot them in the head. Without another word, he started firing at any moving corpse's head. The class quickly caught on, so Jin didn't hesitate to use his Eclipse blood release skill to send blades straight to the enemy's heads. Others followed suit. Kyoza ordered the logistics unit to quickly evacuate patients to avoid further casualties. Siki kept pulling the trigger non-stop, but killing the already dead made him feel disgusted. It was clear he didn't want to continue. Juji announced that he and Rokuro would support the logistics team in transporting patients. Kyoza complained that Juji was once again organizing everything his own way but still ensured patient protection when withdrawing from the area. Siki grew more restless while enemies kept falling under his bullets. Though knowing there was no other way but to shoot, he couldn't stop the feeling of revulsion. He thought of each corpse as someone important to someone else, a person who once had meaning in others' lives. Kiora now ordered all staff to quickly evacuate the remaining patients while Siki and others continued blocking enemies in the chaos. Siki kept thinking about those he had just shot. His mind flooded with mixed emotions as he saw his friends fighting the zombies. He couldn't help but recall the moment Kiora stabbed into Mei's father's brain and the time he himself shot Mei's mother. Though knowing it was unavoidable, Siki still wanted to cry over everything happening, because the only enemy they should be facing now was the Momotaro group, not another half-demon. In another scene, Tsubakiri laughed in front of Naito as if fully aware of what was happening at the demon base. Without hesitation, Naito charged to attack him with an umbrella that had transformed into a spear. But before reaching his target, Tsubakiri used the bodies of Naito's comrades as a shield, causing Naito to fighting the zombies. He couldn't help but recall the moment Kiora stabbed Mei's father's brain and when he himself shot Mei's mother. Even though it was unavoidable, Siki wanted to cry over everything happening because their only enemy now should be the Momotaro, not another half-demon. In another scene, Tsubakiri laughed in front of Naito as if he already knew what was happening at the demon base. Without hesitation, Naito charged at him, attacking with an umbrella transformed into a spear. But before reaching his target, Tsubakiri used the bodies of Naito's comrades as a shield, causing Naito reach the target. Tsubakiri used his teammates' corpses as shields, causing Naito to accidentally pierce through his own body. Tsubakiri laughed mockingly. Looks like a skewer. But before Naito could react, he sensed the presence of his demon traitor creature, the monster, destroying the surrounding corpses, forcing Naito to dodge aside. However, upon seeing his teammates' bodies lying scattered, his expression grew somber. Tsubakiri asked why he looked that way since he should be happy the number of maggots had decreased. Naito coldly replied, "There has to be a limit to baseness." But Tsubakiri sneered. Hearing that from a monster is even more amusing, though honestly, it's pretty boring. The others prepared to support Naito, but he ordered them to return to base immediately because he was worried about what was happening there. Tsubakiri then declared he wouldn't let them leave so easily. He called for his teammate Zomogi. As soon as he got the order, Zomogi clenched his fist and activated his skill to gather the black bacteria in his body, forming an unbreakable cocoon that swallowed Naito and his teammates inside. Tsubakiri praised her for doing well and told Naito that while he was trapped, they would be visiting the half-demon base. He also explained to Naito that escaping that space without Zomogi's permission was impossible, so they would be imprisoned for a long time. Knowing Naito was thinking, he said Naito wouldn't find their base. Tsubakiri revealed he had attached tracking devices to the abandoned corpses, and the signals converged at an interesting place, the underground area beneath Iryuta Shrine. He said they would head there immediately and invited Naito if he could survive until then. Naito tried to stop him, but Tsubakiri kept walking. Before leaving, he gave Zomogi one last order. At that moment, Zomogi allowed that monster to enter the space where they were imprisoned. Naito immediately took a defensive stance upon seeing the creature. Tsubakiri explained that monster was a mass-produced model, so it was no problem if it got destroyed. While leaving with Zomogi, he snapped his fingers, causing the monster's belly to start swelling. Naito realized it was about to explode and shouted for everyone to get down. Just seconds later, it exploded with a devastating blast, destroying the area around the cocoon. Tsubakiri casually walked away, complaining that the explosion wasn't spectacular enough and needed improvement. That was his true spirit. Zomogi asked if he wanted to make sure everyone was dead, but he declined, saying the place was too dusty and he didn't want blood on him again. After the explosion, we see Naito's injured body lying amidst the rubble, his survival uncertain. Meanwhile, Siki continued shooting down the remaining corpses until none were left, drenched in sweat and breathing heavily. Everyone thought the ordeal was over. Kyoza reported that the patients had been safely transferred to another room, and thanked them for making everything all right. Putting that aside, Siki and Kyoza looked toward Mei, who stood motionless before her parents' blood-soaked bodies. After the chaos, Kyoya gently approached her, knelt down, and apologized for frightening her. Siki also apologized for what happened to her mother. Just thinking about it pained him, but surprisingly, Mei reassured him that she was okay. That answer stunned Siki. Mei continued explaining she had never been to school because she'd lived her whole life running, moving from place to place. Because of that, part of her always expected something like this to happen one day, so no one should worry too much. Her words left everyone silent, but the one most affected was Siki. He couldn't believe what he'd just heard. Clearly, those weren't words a child who had just witnessed her parents being killed could say. Siki clenched his fists to hold back his emotions, but suddenly remembered when he was little. He often watched heroes on television. Back then, he was just a kid dreaming of becoming a righteous hero, defeating evil, always imitating the superheroes on screen. Remembering that, Siki wondered, wasn't Momotaro supposed to be a righteous hero? But seeing the sea of blood covering the base made him start doubting this fairy tale hero image. Without hesitation, Siki knelt down, hugged Mei, and said Naito's injured body lay amidst the rubble, uncertain if he was still alive. Meanwhile, Siki continued to shoot down every corpse until none remained, drenched in sweat and breathing heavily. Everyone thought the ordeal was over. Kyoza reported that the patients had been safely moved to another room, and thanks to them, everything was finally stable. Putting that aside, Siki and Kyoza looked toward Mei, the girl still standing motionless before her parents' blood-soaked bodies. After the chaos, Kyoya gently approached her, knelt down, and apologized for scaring her. Siki also apologized for what happened to her mother. Just thinking about it made him heartbroken, but surprisingly, Mei reassured him that she was okay. Her answer shocked Siki deeply. Mei went on to explain that she had never been to school because her whole life was spent running away, moving from place to place. Because of that, a part of her always thought a day like this would come, so no one needed to worry too much. Her words left everyone silent, but the one most affected was Siki. He couldn't believe what he had just heard. Those weren't the words a child who had just witnessed her parents being killed should say. Siki clenched his fists to suppress his emotions, but suddenly remembered when he was little. He often watched heroes on television. Back then, he was just a kid dreaming of becoming a righteous hero, defeating evil, and always imitating the superhero figures on screen. Thinking about that, Siki wondered if Momotaro wasn't supposed to be the ultimate righteous hero. But seeing the sea of blood covering the entire base, he began to doubt the image of the hero in that fairy tale. Without hesitation, Siki knelt down and hugged Mei, saying if the so-called hero caused such cruelty, he'd rather be the villain, and as a villain, he would destroy those who called themselves heroes. Mei was shocked by those words, but Siki held her tightly and assured her everything would be okay because he would create a world where she could live and smile. That declaration was skeptical about the image of the hero in this fairy tale. Without hesitation, Siki knelt down hugging Mei and said if the so-called hero caused such cruel things, he'd rather be the villain, and as a villain, he would destroy those who called themselves heroes. Mei was shocked by those words, but Siki held her tightly and assured her everything would be okay, because he would create a world where she could live and smile. Those words silenced everyone, and Siki continued to comfort her with determination. Those words and Siki's heartfelt emotion made Mei's eyes light up with hope for the first time. After everything, a while later, Kyojin, they had passed before, but maybe Kyoza hadn't noticed it at the time. In fact, if this hadn't happened, he wouldn't have shown them the surprise. Kyoza changed the subject and asked Jin if he had a girlfriend yet. Jin, knowing the doctor's personality, responded minimally. Meanwhile, the logistics unit members and nurses started cleaning up the battlefield, collecting the bodies of the fallen. Siki always stayed close to Mei, never leaving the other classmates, also helping to move the corpses, complaining about how insanely heavy they were, and calling the person in charge a bossy jerk. Meanwhile, Yuji stood silently, deep in thought. Ikari yelled at him for doing nothing, saying wearing glasses doesn't mean you can slack off. Yuji immediately retorted that Ikari was being way too biased against people who wear glasses. Ikari shot back. Then what are you doing? Yuji replied that being attacked proved this place was no longer safe, so he was focusing on staying alert. Seeing Ikari looked confused, Yuji explained that his ability was perfectly suited for defense work. Then, he bit the tip of his finger to let a drop of blood fall to the ground. As soon as the blood touched the floor, Yuji activated his Eclipse blood release skill, creating a radar-like field around where the drop landed. Ikari was astonished to see this, while Yuji explained that with his own blood, he could detect living creatures within a 5-kilometer radius from the blood's location. That was the tracking ability he always used. In an instant, Yuji could clearly sense every area inside the base and added that he could even distinguish which were Momotaro and which weren't. Ikari was visibly impressed, but Yuji admitted he lacked experience to identify the enemy's strength or face. Just then, the radar emitted a warning sound, surprising Yuji when he detected something. Switching to another scene, outside Misumoto restaurant, a new visitor arrived with ill intentions, Freddy's Tsubakiri. Before acting, he made a call and ordered his contact to send several experimental monsters to the exact location. While he chatted casually, beneath the restaurant floor lay the lifeless body of an old lady who had served the students when they first arrived in the city. The person on the other end asked what Tsubakiri planned to do next, and he replied, "I'm going to blow up Onigashima Island." According to him, hunting half-demons required dogs, monkeys, and birds, plus more experimental monsters. Then, he instructed his contact to make sure they brought secret weapons too. Meanwhile, Domogi silently approached the basement entrance they had found earlier, waiting for the right moment to act. Before ending the call, Tsubakiri added that at a recent commander's meeting, there was mention of a particularly dangerous half-demon, but he couldn't remember the name, so he asked his contact to send information about that half-demon just in case. Immediately after, Tsubakiri ended the call and waited for the message. He muttered that if Naito had been here before, there must be something unexpectedly valuable. Domogi called him over and showed him the stairs leading down. Tsubakiri walked forward and commented that since sound spreads widely in this space, it was unclear how many enemies were below. She asked if they should use poison gas. Tsubakiri thought for a moment and admitted it wasn't a bad idea. However, before deciding, he received the requested information message. As soon as he read it, his expression changed instantly, a sinister smile spreading across his face. Immediately, Tsubakiri, that is the tracking ability he always uses. In an instant, Yuji could clearly sense every area in the base and added that he could even tell which was Momotaro and which was not. Ikari was visibly impressed, but Yuji admitted that due to lack of experience, he couldn't identify the enemy's strength or face. Just then, the radar sounded an alarm, surprising Yuji when it detected something. Cut to another scene. Outside Misumoto restaurant, a new customer arrived with ill intentions. Tsubakiri from Freddy's group. Before acting, he made a phone call and ordered his contact to send some experimental monsters to the current location. While casually talking, beneath the restaurant floor, lay the lifeless body of the old lady who once served students when they first arrived in the city. The person on the other end asked Tsubakiri what his next move was, and he replied, "I plan to blow up Onigashima Island." According to him, to hunt half-demons, you need dogs, monkeys, and birds, so just add more experimental monsters. Then, he instructed his contact to make sure they also carry secret weapons. Meanwhile, Domogi silently moved toward the basement entrance they had discovered earlier, waiting for the right moment to act. Before ending the call, Tsubakiri added, "At a recent commander's meeting, they mentioned a particularly dangerous half-demon, but he couldn't recall the name, so he asked his contact to send info about that half-demon just in case they would need it." Immediately after, Tsubakiri ended the call and awaited the message. He muttered that if Naito had ever been here, followed, and he replied, "I plan to blow up Onigashima Island." According to him, hunting half-demons requires dogs, monkeys, and birds, plus many experimental monsters. Then he told the contact to make sure they also bring secret weapons. Meanwhile, Demogi silently moved toward the basement entrance they had discovered earlier, waiting for the right moment to act. Before ending the call, Subakiri added, "The recent commander's meeting mentioned a particularly dangerous half-demon, but he couldn't remember the name. So he asked the contact to send information about that half-demon just in case it was needed." Right after, Subakiri ended the call and waited for the message to arrive. He muttered that if Naito had ever been here, there must be something surprisingly valuable in this place. Demogi called him back and showed him the stairs leading down to the basement. Subakiri approached and noted that because the sound spread widely in this space, it was unclear how many enemies were downstairs. She asked if they should use poison gas. Subakiri thought for a moment and admitted that wasn't a bad idea. However, before making a decision, he received a message with the requested information. As soon as he read it, his expression instantly changed, a sinister smile appearing on his face. Immediately, Subakiri changed the plan and said it's best to go down directly, but this time he told Demogi to ask the name of each half-demon first when killing, because if among them there's a half-demon named Siki, he wants to capture him alive. Instead of killing, according to him, Siki is a special individual, and he's eager to study him. Without hesitation, Subakiri and Demogi went down the stairs leading to the basement, laughing loudly that we will make the ending of this fairy tale truly brilliant. Episode 7 opens with a series of flashbacks about Mei and her parents. Those memories span from when Mei played with them at dusk to avoid being seen, to when she picked flowers to give her mother. Though these memories seem beautiful, they are shrouded in a haze, and the only thing Mei clearly remembers is that her parents always loved and protected her deeply. The haze only clears when her parents are near, but that moment quickly gets overshadowed by Momotaro's dark presence. Mei opens her eyes to the present, realizing reality has changed. She sees Siki and others carrying the bodies of her parents gone. After that last sight, Mei is left alone in a blood-filled room. It is then, after everything that's happened, she finally breaks down crying somewhere else. Kyoza leaves the crematorium with Jin after showing him how it works. He asks Jin to help transport the bodies inside the base. Jin pauses for a moment, reflecting on the fact there's a crematorium in the basement. Kyoza explains that during battles, they often have to bring many wounded, but not everyone can be saved in time, so a crematorium is necessary. This is the world Jin is about to enter, but Kyoza reassures him, as long as he's here, he won't let Jin die so easily, so there's no need to worry. Jin doesn't ask more, but Kyoza then asks him another question if he has a girlfriend yet. The unexpected question makes Jin distracted again, causing Kyoza to feel a bit disappointed, but it's clear he's not ready to give up. As their conversation continues, a black aura makes them both turn around. Before they can react, Kyoza is stabbed in the side. Subakiri looks at Jin coldly, pulling the bloody knife out and coldly says, Jin let his guard down when he turned back without hesitation. Jin steps back and activates his blood release skill, putting himself into a defensive stance. Just by looking at Subakiri, Jin knows he's extremely dangerous and must be eliminated immediately. Jin dashes into attack, but Zomogi appears behind him and uses bacteria to create a box trapping Jin's head. Luckily, Kyoza pulls Jin out just in time, so the box only catches his arm, but the impact is strong enough to break the arm bone. Kyoza worries, but Jin reassures him. The wound will heal quickly, thanks to the demon blood inside him. However, the pain clouds Jin's mind, which is a big problem since both of them are now injured. Despite the serious situation, Kyoza stays calm and asks Jin if he can notify Siki and the others that the Momotaro faction is here. He also requests Jin to lead everyone, including patients, out of this place. Jin asks what about him, but Kyoza just smiles and replies, that's yet to be seen. Definitely, a man willing to risk everything. Jin runs off to find reinforcements. Meanwhile, Subakiri signals Demogi to act, and Demogi places his hand on the ground, slowly releasing bacteria. Kyoza observes carefully, trying to understand how that ability works. If the box he saw earlier was Zomogi's power, then he guesses this time she's creating a bacterial wall, and if they're all inside that wall, it means they plan to kill everyone with no escape. Seconds later, Demogi stands up and reports he has almost surrounded the entire basement of the shrine. That means they really are trapped like rats. Now Kyoza fully understands this place is completely surrounded with no way out. Worse yet, only the trainees who can fight remain, making outside reinforcements impossible. This is a huge problem, because in front of him are two enemies so strong they make him tremble. Facing this, Kyoza can only sigh as if accepting his imminent death before taking action. Subakiri asks him a question. Does he know someone named Siki? That question makes Kyoza's face turn serious, because just that question alone tells him surrender is no longer an option. Without a word, Kyoza pulls out a syringe filled with blue liquid, are now completely surrounded with no way out. Worse, only combat-capable trainees remain, making outside reinforcements impossible. This is a serious problem because in front of him are two enemies so strong they make him tremble. Facing this, Kyoza can only sigh as if accepting that he will definitely die before acting. Tsubakiri asks him, "Do you know someone named Siki?" The question makes Kyoza's expression turn serious because just that question is enough for him to understand that surrender is no longer an option. Without a word, Kyoza pulls out a syringe containing a blue liquid extracted from the aconite plant, a poisonous plant that causes suffocation and multiple organ failure. Tsubakiri says there's no to run, and Kyoza replies, he wants to run too, but even if he wants to, he can't. Before he can act, with a single slash, Tsubakiri cuts his neck, catching him off guard. Kyoza suddenly clutches the wound with his hand, knowing he must drink blood immediately or it will be too late. However, the cut hit a critical spot, so he quickly loses too much blood, and falls to the floor, unable to do anything more. Tsubakiri is somewhat surprised to see him collapse so fast, and moves close to check if he's really dead. He has nothing in hand, so he decides to use Kyoza's corpse as a weapon. He starts injecting bacteria into his body to finish him off, but right then, he changes his mind and decides not to. It seems the person they were waiting for has arrived. Domogi snaps his fingers to allow the experimental monsters he summoned to enter. Tsubakiri asks if they brought what he requested. One of the monsters vomits out a box wrapped in a plastic bag. Even he feels disgusted by it, but still orders to take it out of the bag, carefully unwrap the cover to reveal a luxurious wooden box intricately decorated. Meanwhile, Jin has reached the base to warn everyone about the threat, but he's shocked to see the place covered in blood and almost empty. After searching, he finds everyone hiding in a room. He asks what they're doing. Siki explains that thanks to Suji's tracking, they learned some Momotaro are approaching, so they evacuated patients to the surface. But right after, a black mist suddenly sealed the passage, trapping them inside. Luckily, most patients escaped in time, but some were left behind. Among them was Mei, a nurse who reported she checked all exits, but all were blocked by the black mist, so there's no way out. Everyone asks Jin about Kyoza's condition, but before Jin can answer, an experimental monster suddenly appears in the room. Everyone looks at the creature in confusion, then panics when it devours a patient. Ikari shouts that, if they stay together, they'll all be killed, so the group immediately scatters. Siki doesn't hesitate and runs to find Mei, to protect her, telling her not to leave him. Meanwhile, the experimental monster keeps eating the remaining corpses. Other monsters help Tsubakiri and re-carry the box. When they reach the base's center, he orders them to put the coffin on the ground, then commands to eliminate all half-demons here, except the one named Siki. Domogi asks if he will join the fight, but he replies he will stay beside the coffin to think about how to proceed with his research. Hearing this, Domogi decides to personally fight, so she doesn't hesitate and quickly leaves with the experimental monsters. Meanwhile, in the resting room, Miss In desperately rummages through clothes to find something else. Meanwhile, in the resting room, Miss In desperately rummages through clothes to find something else in the resting room. Miss In desperately rummages through clothes to find something else in the resting room. Miss In desperately rummages through clothes to find something else, because she hates the current uniform she's wearing, saying it restricts her movement. At the same time, Rokuro lies on the floor feeling his heart pounding and struggling to breathe so much that he's sure he's about to die. Kuin angrily tells him to be quiet and explains that feeling is just stress, and because he just running too fast, not saying another word. Kuin covered him with a blanket to create privacy. She quickly changed into clothes she felt much more comfortable in. Rokuro asked what she planned to do, and she replied she would fight because if he couldn't escape, the only option was to face it. Kuin pulled the blanket off Rokuro's face, and he exclaimed that she really was a strong person who was always optimistic, something he just couldn't understand. He said on the way to Kyoto, he accidentally read posts from patients on social media, which made him fear he might be sick too. At that moment, Rokuro felt a headache, which made him panic even more, because he knew anxiety would only make things worse. Kuin complained about his troublesome thoughts. Just then, the sound of breaking glass rang out. Rokuro panicked, pulling the blanket over himself and shouting that he couldn't fight in this anxious state. He begged Kuin to help him. He couldn't do anything without her by his side. Hearing this, Kuin ordered him to hide in the cupboard in the corner. Her expression suddenly turned amused as she said she was the only one he could rely on. Rokuro was a bit embarrassed by that attitude but didn't hesitate to run and hide inside the cupboard, trembling with fear. As the infected beast approached, Kuin prepared to fight and said from start to finish she would handle everything. With just a few strikes, the creature smashed through the door of the lounge, frightening Rokuro as he heard the crashing sounds. Still, he tried to trust Quin's words and abilities. However, inside the pitch-black cupboard, he remained worried even though there was nothing he could do before the battle began. Quin was slightly surprised when the experimental monster asked if she was Siki, clearly mistaking her, and she answered firmly that she was not. Then immediately, she was mercilessly attacked. Quin dodged the attack swiftly, while the creature's blows destroyed the walls in seconds, causing Rokuro to panic hearing everything collapse. He was sure he was going to die, especially when the cupboard toppled over and he fainted from fear. Among the rubble, the beast stood strong, but Quin stepped forward and taunted it not to think it was impressive just because it broke the wall, as it was really just her toy. Without hesitation, she bit her finger to activate her blood release, creating 2 gloves covering her hands with. This was pure and crazy dedication. She smiled and asked if it wanted her to accompany it to death. In another scene, Jin was sprinting through underground tunnels at full speed. He wanted to know what had happened to Kyoya. Meanwhile, Ikari encountered a lone monster and wanted to fight it one-on-one. The monster also asked him if he was Siki, making him angry, because he was mistaken for the person he hated deeply. At the same time, Siki was leading Mei to the garden inside the base but was annoyed because they couldn't find a place to hide, so they had to take refuge behind a bush. Siki was always alert, ready to handle any situation. Meanwhile, Rokuro suddenly woke up in the cupboard. Sure, his heart had just stopped beating. After calming down, he noticed the space around him was unusually quiet, making him think everything that had happened was just an illusion. That made him feel relieved enough to decide to leave the cupboard and head to the psychological clinic. However, as soon as he opened the cupboard door, the first thing he saw was the skull of the experimental monster, the one that had fought Queen. When that creature stood up, Rokuro panicked, begging it to pause because his heart wasn't well, hoping it would pretend not to see him. Surprisingly, the monster actually ignored him, letting Rokuro breathe a sigh of relief. However, he grew even more confused when he saw Queen controlling the monster as if it were her pet. She ordered it to stand in a specific spot, and as soon as it got into position, like others who had been controlled before, she immediately delivered a punch that slammed its face into the floor. Then, Queen jumped on it and kept mercilessly beating it, constantly challenging it to get up. Rokuro hurriedly pulled the blanket back over himself, now more afraid of Queen than the monster. Queen continued beating it until the creature stopped. Pause because my heart isn't feeling well, hoping it pretends not to see you. Surprisingly, the monster really ignored you, making Rokuro breathe a sigh of relief. However, he grew even more confused when he saw Queen controlling the monster as if it were her pet. She ordered it to stand in a specific spot, and as soon as it got into position like others who had been treated this way, she immediately threw a punch that slammed its face to the floor. After that, Queen jumped on it and kept beating it mercilessly, constantly challenging it to get up. Rokuro quickly covered himself with a blanket, now more afraid of Queen than the monster. Queen kept hitting it until the creature no longer moved. Finally, she stopped and smiled proudly as she looked at the monster's crushed face. At this point, it was explained that her ability is called I Love. When her blood touches a target in a certain amount, that target becomes Queen's slave, and gradually loses the will to fight, ending up completely broken, like some people she had known. Queen stood up and laughed triumphantly, saying this guy wasn't worth her effort. Rokuro looked at her with admiration, utterly amazed that she could defeat the monster alone. She smiled, and the narrator revealed that the people she often calls first look for the kitchen, while Rokuro wondered what was wrong with her because she was doing everything for him, making him unable to shake the feeling that this was a trap, like many others he had known who fell for this kind of trick. He began, a strong and reliable big sister, someone many love and admire. But Queen's best friend describes her as a beautiful woman who always gives too much, to the extreme, that she has fully given herself to many men, and the result was they all broke down. Some even had to enter rehab after breaking up with her. That shows just how bold she is. After everything, Rokuro couldn't help but kneel to thank her. He would never forget this gratitude, unless he got amnesia. Quinn smiled and immediately prepared a bed for him, telling him not to worry because she would take care of everything. She gently lifted him and placed him comfortably on the bed. She was very excited to protect him. Quinn devoted all her affection to Rokuro. She told him to rest, that when he woke up everything would be over. Elsewhere, a nurse was running away from a monster but was caught and stabbed through the skull. Meanwhile, Rokuro lays still. Too tense to react. Seeing him pale, Quinn said she would prepare something nutritious with lots of love. She started looking for the kitchen, while Rokuro wondered what was wrong with her, since she was doing everything for him. The chef's head was searching, while Rokuro wondered what was wrong with her since she was doing everything for him, making him unable to shake off the thought that this was a trap, like many others he knew who had fallen for the same trick. He started to fear that she might use him as bait and then devour him when he wasn't on guard. Kuan was worried when she saw him trembling, but just then, a strange noise rang out, enraging her because the second experimental monster had appeared.